Hello, and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Inquiry. Tonight, we are going to wrap up our January series on goal setting and talk about assessment and evaluation. So we've been talking about how we want our students to set their individualized goals. Well, that's all great, except it's report card time. So how exactly are we supposed to assess and evaluate students if every kid in our class is working on something different? So this is the question that I've posed for tonight, and I'm going to go ahead and try to answer that one for you as to how we are going to be able to assess our students when everybody is working on something different. So really, we're going to be digging into differentiation and looking at how goal setting ties all of this together. So thank you so much for joining me. My name is Patty, and I am a junior grade teacher here in Ontario, Canada, and I have weekly videos that talk about all things teaching and using inquiry in your classroom, with my hope that I can help you to make inquiry-based learning more fun and accessible for both you and your students. So let's dig right in. So this entire month, we have been talking about goal setting. And in particular, we have been essentially looking at how to use a lot of differentiation to focus on individual goals for our students to help them tackle the learning that is happening in our classroom. So then the question becomes, if everybody is doing something different, how are we evaluating? Well, I'm certainly not advocating for us designing a different set of criteria or standards for each student in our classroom. That is way too much work and totally unmanageable for busy teachers in today's classrooms. So instead, when we're looking at using a differentiated approach to teaching and learning, or using inquiry-based teaching methodologies in our classroom, we need to think about assessment and evaluation perhaps a tad bit differently, and looking and focusing more on assessing the learning instead of assessing the product that is evidence of learning. Let's talk about the two pieces of assessment, and that is our formative assessment and our summative assessment or evaluation. Now, the formative assessment is the assessment that we are taking in along the way. So if we are talking about goal setting, this is the repeated process that we're going through with our students, starting from the beginning of our unit, where we assess what are the gaps or what are the areas that students need to grow and learn from. And then along the journey, as they're in the process of learning, we are going to be engaged in formative assessment, where we are checking in with our students and checking to make sure that they are still making progress, they haven't stalled out, or that they have not fallen behind, that they are still continuing to grow and to move forward towards accomplishing the set learning goal that is kind of the universal goal for all of our students. So although a student's pathway to achieve that piece of learning might look different between student A and student B, we do want to make sure that we are checking in to make sure that there is still growth and that students are along the right path. So we're going to be following through a very quick cycle where we will meet with our students, assess their growth, and then make new small attainable baby step goals on the way to accomplishing kind of that overall learning goal where we can evaluate them. Now, the second type of assessment is we're talking about summative assessment, and this is the assessment that happens at the end of a learning journey. So this is pretty much predicted on what our curriculum is. We have to evaluate students and use summative assessment on those curriculum expectations, because in essence, this is our job. Our job is to evaluate students to assess whether or not they have learned a standard set of curriculum or curriculum standards to assure that they have met the requirements of the grade that they're in, as to whether or not they are going to continue to move on, pass, fail, and all of that in between. So as our students are planning their little baby steps along that path, we've already pretty much decided or been given that piece, the learning criteria that all students must accomplish by the end of that learning journey. So whether it's math or language, science or social studies, we know that students will have to achieve certain standards for their grade level. So when we're designing summative assessments, we have to be looking at whether or not they have demonstrated their knowledge and understanding and their ability to apply their knowledge to different contexts on that learning goal. So if that is assessment, how do we weave all of that in to looking at the assessment and evaluation when we have all of our students goal setting, and perhaps all of their pathways to success might look slightly different if we're using a more inquiry approach in our classroom. So one of the things you can do is to integrate assessment and evaluation into goal setting, is to really both not only have student goals, but also have your own goals as well. And one of the ways that I like to do this is to clearly define for myself, what does learning look like, and how do I know that learning has happened? So I know learning has happened for my students when I see or when they can, and I'm looking for those specific learning targets that I want to evaluate. Now, for example, if you're looking at a science or social studies, you might not want to break down the big overall, they're going to learn all about the human body. That might not be specific, but you can look more into some of those specific expectations and say, okay, over the next couple of lessons, we're going to look at the lungs. And what is it that I want students to be able to know or understand by the end of these next 3 lessons? And it could simply be, I want students to have a general understanding of how the lungs work in the human body and how air goes in and air comes out. Now, if that's your goal of what you want learning to look like at the end of these 3 lessons, then you have all of these lessons and activities that you can assess for students. Now, you may provide different activities where students can watch a video, they can read an article, they can do an experiment. You have all of these opportunities for students to learn about the lungs. And then they might have to produce a foldable activity where they've watched a video and had to do a reflection, or they have had to have a class discussion about the lungs or participate actively in your experiment. You have all of these different opportunities for them to essentially demonstrate to you that they have understood how the lung works. So through all of these opportunities, I am gathering data on whether or not do students understand how the lungs work. For some students, they'll get it right away and be able to understand, they'll be able to read something and then be able to tell you about it. For other students, they might need multiple opportunities where they might need to do a hands-on, they may need to watch a video, they may need to do some extra practice about it. But what is it that those students need to do in order to accomplish the goal of understanding generally how the lungs work? Now, I'm evaluating this the entire time. I am observing students, I'm having conversations with students, I'm also looking at what they're producing to determine whether or not they have met this outcome that I'm looking for, which is, can they generally understand how the lungs work? So through this process, I am gathering this data collection to decide whether or not they get this goal. Do they get it? And for those students where they might not get it right away, they might need extra practice. So I might pull a small group and work with them because I'm noticing that there might be a few kids that are struggling and falling behind on this. I might need to do some reteaching or represent the information. I might need to give more instruction to some students versus others. I don't necessarily need to be teaching my whole class the same lesson at all times because not every student is going to need that. Some students will need more time with me as the teacher to have those conversations, whereas others will still get the same information without having as much touch points with the teacher. So understanding that different students need different things and providing students what they need, knowing full well that my goal is at the end of these 3 lessons, I want this knowledge to have happened. And I'm looking at allowing students multiple entry points and multiple times and opportunities for them to demonstrate this learning. The assessment and evaluation comes into key at the end of this learning journey of 3 days. Maybe it's 3 lessons that I've conducted on this topic. I'm not evaluating, okay, did they do the worksheet? Did they do the video? Did they participate well in the experiment? And then I'm taking all of those marks, averaging it, and coming up with a mark. That's not really what I'm looking for. Really what I'm looking for is do they actually have the knowledge that I was hoping they would have by the end of the 3. So while I'm taking in the input of the conversations and the products and the observations, at the end, what I'm really evaluating, what I'm really assessing for my students is whether or not they have a general understanding of how the lungs work. And I have multiple points of entry for students to be able to demonstrate this, but I'm not necessarily just collecting and marking every single thing that they do and then averaging it out and coming up with a mark at the end. There's a little bit more of an art to this than there is a science. I'm really looking at how well they understand the concept that I wanted them to understand, or the concept that we said, this is what we're working on. I told them at the end of 3 days, this is what I want you to know. Here are all of the things that we can do for you to show me that you know it, but at the end, this is really what I want you to know. And whether or not it takes you 10 opportunities to show me, 2 opportunities, or 1 opportunity, do you have the knowledge and understanding required to help us move on to the next goal that we're going to set together? So in order to do that, the first thing I need to do is to clearly define what the look for I'm trying to look for is. So I have to define what knowledge and understanding I'm hoping to the knowledge and understanding that I'm hoping to accomplish. Then I need to make it really explicit for my students. Imagine playing a game of darts and someone doesn't tell you where the bullseye is on the dartboard, nor do they even tell you where the dartboard is, just it's somewhere on this wall. It's really important that I tell my students, I am looking for you to do this. They know what I'm looking for and they know how they're going to practice that. I'm going to give them multiple opportunities, but they need to know that this is the question I'm looking for you to be able to answer. You also need to define their groups. You also need to define your class's strengths and needs. You need to know who they are as learners to help design the activities that are going to be most appropriate for those students. Do you have students that have learning disabilities that are going to struggle with information presented to them in one way versus another? Will you need to present it more orally? Will you need to differentiate some of your reading tasks, provide audio visuals like videos for them to get that information in? Are they hands-on learners where you're going to need to give them practical application of where this learning is going to happen? Or are you just going to have a conversation with them, or just multiple attempts and reteaching opportunities? That's deciding the pathway. Knowing that you want to accomplish the goal, decide which path is going to be best for the group of students that is with you. And this is why teaching in this day and age is sometimes a challenge, because what worked last year isn't necessarily going to work this year because you've got a different group of students in front of you. Once you're doing this, it's important for you to check on through. So if you've got 3 lessons to learn about the lungs, that's what you've decided it's going to take you, then you're going to need to check in with students throughout that time, which means you're going to need to collect their worksheets. You're going to need to collect the experiments. You're going to need to watch them do the activities. You're going to need to have conversations with them to pick up some of these things. You need to collect some of those data points and then also have those informal conversations with some students about what they could do differently, where they're going, what they need to do, what the next opportunity should be for them to pursue their knowledge in order to be able to accomplish that goal. And then finally, when the learning is over, you're going to need to have a time where you can accurately assess whether students have actually learned it. Now, this is an opportunity for you to give students a choice in how they're going to show you they've learned this. So this could mean that not every student's notebook or student's piece of evaluation might look a little bit differently. One of the things I'm embracing right now in my classroom is using a learning journal. Now, for math in particular, one of the things I want my students to complete is evidence of their learning. So if I give them a goal, such as I will know my 12 times tables by the end of this week, then that is their learning goal. And I have them write that at the top of their page. This is my learning goal. Below that, they need to either write me or show me the proof that they have accomplished that goal. They can give me examples. They can explain to me some of the vocabulary, the process. They can write it for me, draw it for me. However they want to show me what they've learned or show me evidence that they have satisfied this learning goal is up to them. And it's different for each student, and they get used to the idea of being able to prove that they've accomplished that learning goal. And this way is a differentiated approach to allow students to know this is what we're focused on. There's more than one right way to do this, and this is how I'm going to show my learning. So once you have this set into motion with your students, where you are allowing them multiple opportunities to practice their knowledge and understanding and to show you that they have learned, that a lot of the conversation in your classroom becomes less on the thing you're doing and more on the learning that needs to be accomplished. We want to switch the conversation from focusing on product generation and move it more into focusing on what learning is happening and getting our students to understand who they are as learners, what approach to learning works best for them and their brain, and also allows you as a classroom teacher to differentiate instruction that meets students' strengths and needs as it comes to you in your classroom. So I hope that tonight's video is giving you an idea of how you can use differentiated assessment and evaluation, as well as goal setting, to help you structure the learning that is happening in your classroom. So thank you so much for joining me, and we will see you next week for another episode on using inquiry-based teaching practices in your classroom. If you want more information about tonight or any other videos in the Teaching with Inquiry series, you can go to www.teachingwithinquiry.com to get the links to all of the previous episodes, as well as rebroadcast episodes on YouTube or in podcast form. Thanks so much for joining me, and we will see you next week. Bye for now. Are you a Madly Learning Library member yet? Members get access to free resources every month, including resources that go along with these videos. Join the membership now by going to www.ml-go.com/resource-library.